Hey family, it is so good to see you. We're continuing our conversation on this sermon this week, where we talked about the Grinch that stole Christmas. Remember, that's the theme for our entire month, and we're talking about identity and who you are. And we're going to start off, I want to talk about starting off with like stewing. This idea of meditating on your past, meditating on things that have happened, your pain, your frustration. Like, what is stewing and how has that impacted your life?
One of the funny scenes in the movie is where he says, "How much emotional eating have I doing?" And it has all these cutscenes of him eating an enormous and scary amount of food.
Yes.
And the reality was, and then they have a more serious scene where he's sitting in front of the fire after gazing longingly over Happy Whoville, and he's like, "It's better this way."
Yeah.
When it comes to being alone.
Yeah.
And it's not. And obviously we know that, and we're watching, and you watch him, and you know that, and you're like, you can't wait for him to connect at the end of the movie, and that's what you're hoping for, right? But so many of us have decided that it's better this way.
Yeah.
And what we do is we we sit in our pain, our disconnection, our discontent, whatever it is, and choose to stay there because it's better to stay there than the fear of facing it.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually it's not something that's ongoing. It's something that happened and you're afraid to face either your own emotions or the people that caused it or whatever it is. Don't have hope that there's actually an end to your pain or an end to the depression or loneliness or isolation, whatever it is. And we stew on the negative.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important that you hear and understand that your pain is real.
Yeah.
We're not saying that the person that hurt you didn't hurt you or that it doesn't matter. We're not saying that the organization that caused you pain is justified and that your pain is irrelevant and you should just get over it. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, not to get over it or pretend it didn't happen.
But what we are saying is that you have an opportunity to choose. Are you going to live in that pain or are you going to build for your future?
Right.
Are you going to reconnect with the only answer, right? Because this whole story of the Grinch that stole Christmas is about a man who is in pain, who had a terrible past, who was hurt and broken and mistreated, and then chooses isolation because it's safer. And many of us have made that choice, either in seasons or in our lives, that it's safer to be alone, it's safer to be in isolation, it's safer to disconnect than it is to really invest in intimacy in family.
Right, and we're talking about who are you, Whoville, your identity, right? And so it's nearly impossible to actually see and understand who you are when what you dwell on is your pain or is what causes disconnection in your life. And so, again, we're not saying to ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist. And in this version of the Grinch, at the end, he steps into family and he's still scared. He's like, I don't want to hit the doorbell, but like realizes as he walks in, like, oh, I have something to offer and people want me here.
Yeah.
And you'll never realize that if you stay alone.
That's
right?
So
and so like you'll never actually understand like I have value, I have worth, this is who I am. You'll never see positive things happen until you take the steps, right? Like he had to march all the way down that mountain wearing a tie, knowing that he was going to walk into people that he stole Christmas from. Like that reality could have kept him up there indefinitely.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's super interesting. So like Matthew talks about the Great Commission, what we're called to do, or the greatest commandment, is what we're called to do. This idea that we are called to love the Lord our God with everything inside of us and love our neighbor as ourselves. So I really want to encourage you, once you say, hey, God, I'm on your team,
right?
Which we presume that you've made that decision, right? That you're on his team. You then cannot live in isolation. It's totally in contradiction to the thing that he says is the most important.
And it's impossible to love the Lord your God with all you are and not love your neighbor and not love yourself.
That's right.
Because he is love and has chosen each of... So, like, you can't say, I love God, I have a great relationship with God, but I hate all those whatever people.
Yeah, 100%.
If there's hatred and bitterness towards... Even if it's an organization or a whole race or a whole political demographic, whatever it is, right? Like, if there's hatred, like, you're not actually in connection with a loving Father yet.
That's right.
Or you might have that intention, and that's great, but like your heart doesn't hold on to hate when you actually choose love.
That's right. So how do we get free from that? How do we get to the other side? Well, the most important thing that we can realize is that Galatians 5:22 talks about the fruit of the Spirit. I've talked about this with you guys before, but this verse is really important for me because of how it starts. It says that the fruit of the Holy Spirit, right? Not the fruit of Isaiah, not the fruit of Ty, not the fruit of you sitting wherever you're at. It's the fruit of the Holy Spirit, which means that if I want it, I have to go to the Holy Spirit. I can't do it by myself.
Yes.
The crazy thing is, it says the fruit of the Spirit is love. The very first one. Which means that God said, hey, look, the most important thing that you can do is love me with everything you have and love the people around you the way that I've loved you. The only way for you to love is to get love. The only way for you to get love is to go to the tree. That fruit comes from the Holy Spirit. And so what we want to talk about, what we want to hammer into your heart today is that you're called to dependence. Right? And that dependence starts with God. That dependence starts with connecting and encountering the Holy Spirit so that you feel and experience his love for you and then can share that with the people around you. My favorite scene, to be honest with you, in the whole movie is the end. He's in his house after he realizes all the terrible things that he's done and has brought back all the gifts and done everything that he knew how to do to fix the mess that he made. But he's still alone and he's in his house.
Right.
And out of nowhere, Cindy Lou Who climbs up this giant mountain to get to his house because he had completely separated and isolated himself, knocks on the door, and invites him to dinner.
Right.
And he's like, why would you do this? I've done terrible things to you, all such stuff like that. Well, she ends the story after the invite, a conversation with, you've been alone long enough. The invitation for you this week, this month, this year, forever, is for you to realize that you have been alone long enough. The pain that you've experienced is real. The hurt and the disconnection that people have sown into your life is real, and we don't want to pretend like that didn't happen, but we want to lead you to that healing. And it starts with an encounter with God, depending on him, because we are dependent on you to be everything that we're called to be. But it has to come from that place of connection with God. So we want to encourage you and invite you this month, this holiday season, to connect with a family that loves you and that always starts with encountering God together. Everything that we do, every time we get together, starts with and has to come from that encounter with God so that we can love each other the way that God has called us to.